All right. Greetings from the Dark Continent. Conscious Caracal here with another episode to shine some light on the goings on down south. But we're going to take it broader this time in regards to more of a general idea and sentiment that we're going to be discussing, not specific news events or, for example, the US election or whatever. This is going to be more about psychological concepts. And here to help me with that type of conversation and take part is a friend of the show, Quentin Ferreira, clinical psychologist and writer. I've had him on, I think, 3 times prior, and we're going to get into some more interesting topics tonight. And I hope someone can learn something from it. I hope people can get some type of insight or perspective. I mean, then the show would have been a big success. So welcome back on the show, Quentin.
Thanks very much, Adams. It's good to be here with you again.
So in terms of 2020, I mean, it's become a bit of almost like a worn-out cliche to acknowledge that it has been an interesting year. A lot of things happening, a lot of unpredictable things happening, and you as a psychologist would know unpredictability kind of wreaks havoc on the psyche, specifically for people that tend to overthink or people that have the big picture in their minds constantly. Do you think 2020, in terms of how it has gone so far, is definitely a year where a lot of problems in regards to mental health have come to the fore that need to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2020 has wreaked havoc on people's mental health. The COVID situation is one thing. I think the lockdowns exacerbated the mental health effects of a widespread panic and a pandemic. And politically also, I think people have struggled with the goings on in the world. Of course, like, again, the lockdowns were a big aspect of it, and more recently the US election and the furore around everything that went on there. So tough year for people. At the beginning of the pandemic, I started doing sort of online psychotherapy and coaching with people back home, and there was a massive demand. I could barely keep up with it. And, people were feeling very, very desperate and quite hopeless, actually. So, yeah, I can say 2020 has definitely been a tough one, probably one of the toughest for our generation.
Right. And on a personal level, maybe to kind of ease into the topic, on a personal level in regards to this time, especially now, I mean, you were in Europe and there were some hectic lockdowns there. How did you keep your mental health in a good state during this time? What did you focus on to kind of keep the perspective and keep the more darker or more nihilistic thoughts at bay, or the feeling of impending doom?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I've also had some changes in my personal life as well. So the last time we spoke, I was probably still living in the Netherlands. So I was living in the Netherlands for 4 years. And now about 2.5 months ago, I moved to Portugal. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I was working full-time from home. And then I was seeing people for my psychotherapy and coaching after work and during my lunchtime. So basically what I was doing to cope in the beginning was, well, first of all, I love to work out, but we couldn't go to the gym. So I took up yoga, and I went to some calisthenics park around the corner from my house and was just doing, every day working out, doing some yoga. I found that the 2 hours of commuting that I used to do, I was able to read a lot. So I read quite a few books during that time, and also helping out other people was really a meaningful experience for me, being there for them. It kept me sane in a way, I know that maybe sounds a bit contrary to what people might expect, but indeed, hearing about other people's struggles and helping them work through that was really great for me. Since moving to Portugal, though, it's been a bit different because I haven't had a job since I've moved here. I've been trying to do my own thing. I'm helping people that want to invest, by the way. So if anyone's interested in that, you just check out my chat with Ramon Cabernac on the morning show. But since I've been here, my main focus has been family, and then, immersing myself in, learning to speak the language properly and reading and still exercising and stuff like that. And I'm also listening to a lot of different music now. That's another hobby of mine. I walk down to the beach and just put on some headphones and I zone out there for an hour or two and just really get deep into music. So those are the ways that I've kind of coped with this nagging stress of change in the world right at the moment.
Mm. Right. And now that you've named or mentioned the ways that you cope with the uncertainty, I see there's a comment that actually is very good. Sideliner Opinion says, uncertainty is a mind worm. It rattles most people out of their comfort zone. That's absolutely true. But like I said, in terms of you were able to find these little things that you could use to kind of keep yourself busy, find meaning, find something to keep yourself busy in a meaningful way, to combine those two. But for people, and I know a lot of people are struggling with this, in regards to identifying those types of things, and how, I mean, for you, it seems it was easy. You could find the things that you could use to kind of keep your mind busy in a productive and also in a mental healthy way. But what would your advice be psychologically for people that are struggling to identify those things? Because I mean, I don't reckon this is something that is obvious to everyone.
Sure. Well, I don't want to give the impression that it was easy for me. It wasn't. And to find those things actually also wasn't easy for me. So I'll give also a little bit of just personal background. Like, I wasn't practicing psychology since I left South Africa. And that was 4 years ago. Tomorrow actually will be 4 years. So when I did that first, when I offered those coaching and psychotherapy sessions at the beginning of the lockdown, I don't know, man, something just occurred to me. It felt like I was driven and pulled in that direction. And a thought just occurred to me that I had to do that. And it was the right thing to do, and that would make a difference. So I think when you're making a difference, that is something that is extremely meaningful and super, super important. And it goes to the psychological need for immortality. And everyone has to have an immortality mission, because our fundamental fear is the fear of death. And the fear of a virus is also the fear of death, you know? So at this point in time, I think the need to find something meaningful has been so acute for so many people. Maybe people have lost their jobs due to the lockdowns, or family members, or actually just having your routine changed has given you time to reevaluate things. And the search for meaning is the search for sort of a metaphorical immortality. Okay, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. So for me, it was about, like, if I could help someone, that would change their life, and they would always kind of remember where they were at that time, and somewhere, somehow, like, our conversation would live on forever. Okay,
might have a ripple effect.
Exactly. Subsequent to that, though, family has become my number one focus. I have elderly grandparents here, so helping them out has been really great. And also supporting my wife, because she started a new job and is doing super, super well in her career. And so I'm sort of now supporting the household, basically, which is a funny thing. When I went to open a bank account, they had to put me down as housewife, because they don't have other designations for men who stay at home. But anyway, just to answer your question, it is a super difficult thing to find what's meaningful to you. But people will struggle with two aspects of it. First of all, they don't know what to do, and if they do know what to do, they don't know how to go about doing that. So where it should start is kind of with an interrogation of the self. So maybe sit down with a little bit of a journal or something like that, and try to envision and imagine your best self. Okay, and write some of the traits down. This is actually a Stoic exercise that Marcus Aurelius used to practice, called what does he call it? Contemplating the sage. So you start off by writing down some key traits and some key goals and things like that would encompass your ideal self. Okay, and then every day you reevaluate how your day went in line with that kind of thing. Okay, and after some time, recheck. After some time, the picture might become a little bit clearer for you of what actually means a lot to you, and what are maybe the kind of things that you've noticed after recording them that you're maybe not using your time in a way that makes you feel better about yourself or that contributes to the world around you, and then start slowly moving away from that kind of thing. So it first starts with sort of recognizing and identifying it. But I do believe that everyone has a propensity for something, a talent for something. And you also will never know if you don't kind of broaden your horizons. So also, I think read as widely as possible. I mean, for a long time, actually, it was kind of silly. I got stuck reading only psychology. And after a long time, I was like, yeah, but I'm now finding myself interested in other things. And then I started to read about religion, and I started to read about Stoicism, and I started to read about existentialism. And then from that, I kind of got a deeper interest in philosophy. And then my life got much more richer because I was then able to like take all of this ideas from other fields and stuff like that and apply it. So I would say also people like just expand your horizon. I mentioned music earlier, and I think that maybe people thought that was a trite thing, but I really don't think it is. I think music is phenomenal, and if you expand your musical tastes, you could learn about a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things. Like, I'll just give you also a silly example. Like, I like this author. His name is Haruki Murakami. He's a Japanese author, and he writes kind of this magical realism, existential isolation fiction. Okay. But he always writes about music because he had a jazz club in Japan. And so I was like, never really listened to much jazz, but he wrote about some stuff, and I would go out in the book and check out the songs because he writes about real artists and stuff like that. Or the character will play a record or something like that. And then from that, I kind of learned a whole bunch about Japanese jazz, and then how Japanese jazz came about after the Second World War and all these kind of things. So just open your mind and find little rabbit holes and go down them. And you might find something that's super, super interesting to you and that really resonates with you on a deep meaning. And then go about and learn more about that and follow that. That's the way to kind of get yourself on that path.
Right. It's interesting that you mentioned those little rabbit holes, because that's, I think, how most hobbies start. You're just in conversation with someone at a braai or at a kuier, and they mention something and they kind of get your attention and prickle your curiosity. And then you go look it up. And then it looks fun. So you try it. And it doesn't matter really what it is, if it's woodworking or an instrument or some type of book that you're reading. And then it kind of snowballs from there if it has a big enough impact on you. Now, there's something else that that actually flows from that, and you were talking about more constructive things to keep yourself busy with, but you also mentioned something that are a bit more escapist, as for example music. Now, a lot of people would take the stance that you only need to focus on what is constructive or what will give you an end product. But that's the easier thing to kind of defend. The other one that's a bit harder to defend is the escapist one, because there's a lot of negativity connected to it. You could argue that you're wasting your time if there's not an end product. You could argue that you're only postponing your problems, or that you're hiding or not paying attention to your problems. You're just putting them under the rug. But what is your take on the more escapist ways of spending your time in regards to, for example, music or reading fiction, or reading, or for example, watching good films, or enjoying art, for example, things that don't give you an end product at the end, but almost in a way still makes the individual feel that his time was well spent?
Yeah, I think some things are just an end in themselves, and it can be good and it can be bad. I mean, obviously, if you are, let's say, just you want to stay at home and read all day and not interact with anyone else and not live your life, but just kind of create a little world with you and the book, I would say that's not going to take you anywhere. But if it's part of a balanced lifestyle, then it's really, really good for you. And as I said earlier, like one thing can snowball into something else. You pick up the right book, it can pique your interest in a totally different topic, and could become even like a career or something for you, or even a side hustle. So there are some things that are ends in themselves and for good, but I think you need to just, again, take stock of where you are honestly and say, well, did I spend a bit, maybe too much time, maybe just chilling on the beach and listening to music? Or did I move myself a bit more towards my ideal self? So that's where it is. You have to find that balance. But I mean, I don't think art or anything like that is a waste of time. I think it enhances life. And, sometimes when you're out of control, and this is something I learned from actually practicing mindfulness as well. Um, when there are things that you can't control, the only thing you can control is your reaction to it and your thoughts to it. And sometimes just a little bit of, escapism, the right song puts you in a bit of a different mood, or reading the right book kind of just changes your brain frequency. And that's not technically true, but, just changes the way you think for just a bit. And that opens another door for you. And you can start moving in a different direction from there. So I don't think it's a waste of time, but just keep tabs on yourself, keep contemplating where you are today and how you did the day and where you want to be tomorrow.
I'm actually getting a lot of stories of people in terms of what they did during the lockdown. So Cornelius says he started smoking meat.
Cornelius.
His own smoker from a YouTube rabbit hole. So that's exactly what we're talking about.
I actually read some of his tweets about his smoke. It looks delicious.
Nice, dude. Sideline opinions also say I started making my own biltong during lockdown, so there seems to be a meat denominator, common denominator of all these what people try to do. I personally I started making cider and I started making beer, and I perfected those recipes, and now I have something that I can use in the future. So I enjoy that very much. And I see here as well. Cornelius says that he actually does have a biltong maker, but hasn't used it yet. So maybe that's something on his horizon. And Rory also made a very good comment when he said, gardening, learning a musical instrument, many distractions that lead to betterment of self. No, absolutely. So while we move on to the next topic, you guys can also keep telling me what type of hobbies or things you picked up during lockdown. I love seeing that in the chat. So, Quentin, there's something that is a bit more of a serious topic, or a bit more of a difficult and complex topic, but I think we need to discuss it, and that is the idea of when you have found something that you're passionate about, for example, a cause, something that gives you meaning. Let's say you try to bring awareness to farm murders, or your cause is an environmental one in regards to planting trees or cleaning up your environment. Or your cause is to bring awareness to corruption or exposing corruption. Any type of cause that you've latched on, you find meaning in it. That's great. That's excellent. You're actually doing exactly what what we've been talking about in all our chats in terms of finding that thing that gives you meaning. But then you're not out of the woods yet, because then whatever that cause can also consume you in a certain way. Let's take, for example, a cause that gives me a lot of meaning, and that is bringing awareness to farm murders. Coming from a farming community, I would personally like if I could fight every hour of every day just to try and stop farm murders and to bring awareness to farm murders. But unfortunately, that's not possible. It's not practical, and it's going to burn you out. That happens with a lot of causes that are bigger than yourself. If you are genuinely convinced that cause is going to better the world, and you have a burning passion inside of you to really serve that cause, you're going to want to fight every hour of every day and really make a difference, which is excellent. But as I said, there is that risk of burnout, and there is that risk of when you don't achieve incredible results of nihilism setting in. For example, we are seeing a lot of progress, for example, in the fight against farm murders, but it's not perfect. We're not, for example, halving the amount of farm murders that happen every year. Ideally, we would want to end it by the end of the year, and that would be done. But then when you don't achieve that, there is that risk of that creeping nihilism or demoralization that I'm pretty much trying to whistle against thunder here. It's not making a difference. So my question then for you in that regard is, how do you avoid that burnout? How do you find that balance when you have found a cause that really inspires you, something that drives you, something that genuinely gives you incredible meaning, but at the same time, it's a cause that you desperately want to succeed. How do you find that balance between keeping yourself, your mind healthy and your life balanced, at the same time giving as much as you can towards that cause that you're pursuing?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. And I think it's an extremely tricky balance to get right, because when you're doing something that's inherently meaningful, it does seem like it can consume all of you. And actually, in the moment when you're doing it, you're in what they call a flow state. So there was this psychologist called Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. That's it's a long name. I don't know how to spell it, but anyway, if you go and look up the flow state, and he would say that it's a state that is when you're doing something that's personally meaningful to you, challenging to you, but just difficult enough that you have to raise your game to get there, but still accomplishable. And you lose all track of time, and you're just completely engaged in that one thing. Very, very good and very meaningful, very positive. But a person is only has sort of finite energy, right? So when I was training to be a psychologist, they actually drummed this into us a lot. And they kind of used the metaphor of an oxygen tank. And they would say, well, when you're doing psychotherapy with someone, it's kind of like you're sharing a tank. And so they're breathing from your oxygen. And you have to go and replenish that oxygen. Otherwise, you can't be effective for the next person. So I think it can come down to being honest with yourself about when are you the most effective, because I think you're probably more effective fighting for whatever cause it is if you've also had 8 hours of sleep a night. If you've stayed up until 4 a.m. for the past week and you're like feeling very driven, it's a great feeling to be that motivated, but you're probably only running on 70%. Whereas if you took a little bit of
it's not sustainable.
No, it's not, exactly. If you took a step back over the longer term and you ran it at 90 to 100% over the longer term, it's better than running on 70% in the shorter term, but appearing to be doing more, if you know what I'm saying. And that's a very, very difficult trap for many people, especially people that are quite conscientious. They will work really, really long hours and not feel like they're stressed out until they hit the wall. And when they hit the wall really.
Quentin just paused there. Let's give him a second to reconnect. And that's the thing. I think the big risk. All right, you're back. You just paused there for a second.
It's so weird. I was saying that burnout is
talking about hitting that wall.
Yeah, getting to burnout. It is a real thing, but again, just take note of yourself. And this is also where mindfulness can come in, like pay attention, spend some time, pay attention to the contents of your thoughts and sort of train your mind to become more aware of your internal state. And with that practice, you can be a little bit more honest about where you are at all times, so that you can say, like, I really worked too hard this week. I need to take a breather because next week the fight starts again. So think long term. That's also another thing. Like, and also when someone is extremely passionate about something, but it doesn't bear fruit in the sort of time frame that you're hoping for, that can be quite demoralizing, as you mentioned earlier. But it is kind of, and then you get into this kind of thing, well, why should I do it if it's not bearing any results? So I'll give you guys just an example. A friend of mine from the Netherlands, she wrote a book, okay? And she spent a long time, like I think 2 hours or 3 hours every day for like 3 years working on this book after her actual day job. And it turned out really nice and whatever, and she published it herself, but it didn't gain any traction, right? And she felt like really ashamed of it. But then she also felt ashamed of like saying that she's giving up writing at some point. But she did. But then she didn't tell anyone that she's given up or anything like that until she found a new job. and she was actually able to use her own self-taught skills with her new role. And so it can come to pass that you spend a lot of time and a lot of energy doing something. It doesn't quite work out, but it doesn't mean that that's the end of the game. It's just the end of this particular match. You could find that the skills you learn, or I don't know, the minds, even if it's just discipline, the discipline of sticking through something, that skill is very vital, and that can set you apart from someone else. So try to see what you can take from it if it doesn't bear fruit, and just keep at it until it's not possible to do so anymore. And maybe down the line, and it usually is true, down the line, you've actually learned a lot more than what you thought you did. And it only comes to pass when you're challenged again in that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think the worst case scenario in that regard is, especially if you're a very driven person, is that you do hit that wall eventually. You're like, no, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And then when you hit that wall, I mean, you can put, for example, let's take another cause. Let's say your cause is to plant a lot of trees in your town, and you feel very passionate about it. You want to beautify your surroundings because you, for example, think the municipality is not doing a good job. But you feel very passionate about it. So you go out every day and you go plant 5 trees. You're like, I can do it. But after like 3 months, or let's say after a month, your body is so absolutely wrecked from digging those holes, planting those trees. Your skin is burned to a crisp. And then you kind of quit. And then you only come back after like a few months later. Or maybe you don't even come back. You feel so discouraged by the state that you were in, and because you crashed, and then you don't really get a lot of progress. You put in so much effort. It's like sprinting a marathon. You start off and I can do this. I'm immortal. And then you just start sprinting, and then after the first few Ks, you realize I've just spent all my resources and I'm gassed. Then you give up. You can't even finish the marathon. So I think pacing is absolutely critical when it comes to these things. You need to be aware of your own mortality. If we could all just survive and be driven, or could all just be energized by our drive and by our will, that would have been ideal. I think we would have seen a lot of good in the world. But unfortunately, that's not possible. You're going to have to be aware of your limits. And I think you touched on that when you talked about or answered the question. So I think that's in the end, the bottom line is you have to think long term. Rather think about how many bags of salt can I carry from point A to point B if I carry 1 bag of salt every day, rather than thinking if I give it my all, I can finish this in 1 week. And then you end up breaking your back, and then you can't even finish carrying all the salt. So I think that pacing and that mindfulness of your own mortality and limits, I think, is going to be the key. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the honest self-evaluation that comes with that, and that's also, a skill that one should learn. So like I mentioned the mindfulness, and I also mentioned that I've gotten quite into stoicism in the past couple of years. And indeed, like the Stoics would say, and it sounds so trite, but it's so true, do what is natural. Okay. And yes, it is natural to work, it is natural to use your body, and it is natural to use your mind. But it's also natural to rest, and it's also natural to sleep and things like that, and the activities we mentioned, which can be an end in themselves. Learn your limits, learn what you're capable of. You could push yourself for sure, and you must, especially anyone who does sports knows that you only get greatness when you push yourself past where you think you can go. But the challenge is to stay at that level. And then you have to then, like I said, I use the metaphor of the oxygen tank. You got to fill that tank from time to time and learn where that level is. So you're being aware of your internal process, practice some mindfulness, study some philosophy, get to know how your own mind works. Then you can pick up the cues from your body and from your mind as well. Like, I pay attention to my dreams, for instance. I know, like, when I'm not doing so well, when I'm feeling stressed out, I can notice particular themes in my dreams and stuff like that. And then I take a step back and I go, shit, actually, I need to reflect what's bothering me so much lately. And then I need to realign in line with that kind of thing. So you're wiser than what you give yourself credit for. And you're built evolutionarily to survive in this world. But you have to pick up on the cues from your body and your mind, honestly and rationally. And that will help you to stay at a good functioning level for as long as possible.
Mm. I see here's a question for you, Quentin, and just to remind everyone in the chat, thank you very much for tuning in. And if you leave a like, that'll actually help out the show quite a bit. And if you have questions for me or Quentin, you can leave them in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. So here is a question from Sideliner Opinions, who asks, why does politics upset people so much, sometimes breaking up families and friendships? And I think this question actually links up with where the trajectory of our chat is going. So I think we might as well go in that direction.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sadana. And it's happened to me, man. I've had fights with close family members who I didn't think I could get any closer with over politics, particularly over Cyril Ramaphosa, actually. So you guys probably all know where I stand on the ANC and anyone who's aligned with them. Cool. So I think this is a super important question, and we spoke on Wotan's election live stream a little bit. You want to say to the viewers what you said when we ended that stream, because I think that's that end is a good way to begin this conversation.
Right. So what I said there was, and this was before the election results were in, and I've had a sneaking suspicion that this election was not going to go the way that a lot of people in Austin thought it would go. So I was already telling people, don't let, and this is not about the US election, this is about elections in general, whether that be the US election or 2021's South African municipal election. Don't let the result of elections determine your happiness. That's not a good strategy, because in the end, if that is your strategy, it's like flipping a coin and saying, I'm going to flip a coin this morning. If it lands on heads, I'm going to have a good day. If it lands on tails, I'm going to have a bad day. You're going to have a shit ton of bad days if that's your strategy. And the same goes for elections. If elections determine your happiness, and if your team wins, you're happy. And if your team loses, you're distraught. And I'm talking about in a very strong sense. Not about, you can feel down or happy when your party or your candidate has a great success. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm talking about being down in the dumps in terms of genuine nihilistic creep, or even getting too cocky or too invested in almost like in a sports team sense when your candidate or your party wins. So I think that was my advice: is you need some degree of separation between the result of an election and your happiness and your mental health. Because if you make that one and the same, your mental health is going to go up and down like a ship on a stormy sea, and that's not good. That's not good for your mind. And your mind wants certainty. Your mind wants stability. It doesn't want to go up and down constantly, because that's going to wear yourself out very quickly. So my final thoughts there was, when it comes to these types of things, you need to keep perspective, the bigger picture. There isn't an election in the world that's going to change the world in such a way that it's going to be permanent, or that it's going to be, this is the election of a century. That's not true. There's never been an election of a century. There can be drastic changes from elections. There can be genuine changes that are going to affect you very profoundly. That's definitely the case. 1994 in South Africa had a lot of profound change for a lot of people. But at the same time, it's not like an election is going to mean that the next day, because you backed the wrong candidate, you're going to be lined up against the wall and shot by a firing squad. And I think people need to keep that perspective in the long run. Things might get more difficult. Your angle of, let's say you're climbing a wall towards your cause, and an election happens, that is going to affect your trajectory. The result of that election is going to determine the incline of the mountain that you're climbing, but it's not going to turn the mountain on its head or make that incline 90 degrees. That's not how these things work. So you're going to have to adapt, you're going to have to overcome, and you're going to have to take stock of what has changed and what is going to be affected by the result of whatever that election or political development is going to be. And you're going to have to overcome it. That's life. It's not like things are always continually progressing towards improvement or continually progressing towards a perfect world or utopia. You just have to look at history, and I think that's actually something I didn't mention in that stream that I think I would suggest for a lot of people is to look at history. And some people mentioned it earlier in the chat as well. There were some horrible times in the past with suffering levels that you can't even imagine. So I think if you go look at the bigger picture in regards to where your ancestors or other nations have gone through or come from, you might get a lot of perspective in regards to how bad it can get, but also how good it can get. There have been some golden eras in the past as well. And don't think that history is linear. I don't think history is just this continuous climb towards a perfect world. History is up and down. History is full of cycles. History is waves. It's currents. It's something that's a lot more dynamic than just a single man walking up a flight of stairs in one direction. It's cycles. It's that age-old saying of hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create bad times. That's been the pendulum of history since the dawn of man, or since the first civilization became to be. So I think that would be my intro to this topic.
Yeah, dude. I really like what you said now, but when you said it at the time as well, we discussed how politics makes shitty religion, and politicians are even shittier gods. But there's a layer in that which answers Sideliner's question. And shout out to Sideliner, what a mensch. I wish I knew who you really were, because I see you all the time everywhere. I'd love to have a beer with Sideliner one day. But anyway, there is a layer of this, which is politics becomes ultimate truth for some people, right? You become so invested in that. And if we think about it, like, ideology is, I mean, we're both looking at, let's say, like, I'm someone who is kind of a libertarian, classical liberal, right? So I have a particular way of viewing things. Someone who's ultra left-wing progressive has another totally different way of looking at exactly the same thing. So the reason we clash is because it's kind of like two truths colliding, and my identity is somewhat invested in the fact that I can appraise reality for what it is, and so is that person. And then when someone comes with an alternative viewpoint, it's not just an attack on the issue, or like a way of examining an issue. It's a way of actually challenging your validity as a human being inhabiting the world and seeing the world. It's almost like it shakes your entire view of history. Like the other day, I found out that guy that sings that song Informer, you know that one?
Yeah.
The white dude. And that shook my entire world. But seriously, on a more profound level, like, that's what I think makes politics so, I guess, toxic in a way, is that it becomes a replacement for the search for truth, okay? And that's why I said it makes a shitty religion, because it's not necessarily true. It's just a way of viewing the world. But if you're invested in being the one with the truth, you're going to have a bad time when things don't go your way, when people don't see the veracity of your own truth. And I guess, look, the Donald Trump, this last election with Trump, it's not over, but, we laughed at the libs because they were very meme-worthy over the past 4 years, screaming and freaking out. But they honestly and truly believed that Donald Trump was evidence that they're living in some kind of fascist, authoritarian racist, sexist, homophobic country.
Maybe just to add a point there, I think the biggest mistake you can make is to think that those type of the tears that you saw on those videos and those freakouts and those genuine panic, to think that it was an act, to think that it was theater. Those people genuinely, if you could climb into their mind and see what was going on in there, you would see a genuine person that is fearing that this is going to happen. And this is the product of the propaganda that they've been consuming. But never make the mistake that these people are all conniving in regards to they're all just putting on an act for their own personal gain. Those people exist, absolutely. Those grifters definitely exist. But the normal people, the people that aren't politicians, the people that aren't race hustlers or career activists in regards to just doing it for the money or grifting, that's genuine what you're seeing there. These people are genuinely fearing that they are going to wake up in a dystopian future, because that's what they're being told by the people that they respect or the people that they rely on for their information. So yeah, I just wanted to add that there, but please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. That goes 100% to the point, which is that it is for them the truth. It is for them, and bringing forth their version of the right way of the right world, let's say, their utopian vision, becomes the most meaningful thing for people that are too into politics like that. Okay, so I did say a little bit earlier about an immortality mission, but I'm now talking on like the deepest philosophical level of what orients a person in the world. Okay, and that's why I said politics makes shitty religion. Because before we had politics, there was always politics, but before it became this kind of deeply philosophical thing, the way we oriented ourselves in the world was spiritual. And I think that's a consequence, our ability to orient ourselves symbolically and spiritually in the world is a consequence of our ability to speak. It's a consequence of our ability to use language and represent things symbolically. So you have this layer, you have that kind of inbuilt hardwired layer of your brain that makes meaning and makes sense of the world symbolically. And that's the layer upon which religion is built, and ideology and politics all kind of rely on that hardwired aspects of yourself. So really, politics gets so divisive is because it goes to a core of what makes a person feel like a person and what gives them meaning in some sense. But I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone of being overly interested in politics sometimes. But I have higher things in my life that orient me. And I'll give you just an example. Like one of my detractors and a left-wing troll came after me on Twitter and was like, "Oh, you fucking hypocrite. You moved to Portugal and it's run by a left-wing government. Why don't you just stay in Holland where they're like center-right, whatever?" And I was like, sorry, do you think that I put like the politics of a place in front of the things like family and culture? What kind of a human being do you think I am? That I'm interested in these things, of course, on an intellectual level. But
yeah, you're not going to be moving to a communist country just because there's some type of aesthetic to it.
Yeah, exactly. But like the assumption is that you must now live where your politics are most well represented. Well, sorry, there's no place like that for
these
me.
Things change. No country remains permanently leftist or permanently centre-right or permanently whatever.
Exactly.
So if you're doing that, you're going to be country hopping every decade of your life.
Exactly, and that's why I say it's important to have a higher orientation than that. And for me, that's my spirituality. It's my relationship with the numinous. And one of the holiest things in my life is my family. Like my family is my everything. My wife, my mother, my brother, my grandparents, my cousins, they are everything to me. And when I look at what's really important and I see my presence in their lives and we make each other's lives better, that's cool. Being a practicing psychologist for me was also something that was a higher form of meaning because, it wasn't just a job. It was like, you have conversations with people that echo out into infinity. But even this kind of thing, I really love doing this. And I know you do it because you really love doing it too. And this is a higher form of meaning for us. So don't get caught in that cycle of making politics your highest form of meaning. You are not your political identity. It is maybe just a label that you can use for convenience sake to differentiate yourself from someone else. That's not you. But I think nowadays, especially, and social media is really fucking our brains up big time.
We don't know what they think. I mean, social media is a recent thing. We haven't even scratched the surface in regards to the research that still needs to be done on the psychological effect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. But in my opinion, it mobilizes the very worst aspects of our hardwired reptilian brains, the tribal aspect. So you got to pick your tribe, right? There you are. And it's all full on war. It's balls to the wall, full on war, if you let it be like that.
Yeah.
And I know I get there in the trenches too. I'm not trying to say anything like I'm, not involved in it, but you can always take a step back, and also you can always use it like a trickster. Just joke about it and have fun with it. Yeah. Because when you start taking it super seriously, I think there's where the danger is. But if you kind of doing serious shit, but with a tongue-in-cheek thing, that's another angle where I feel like you're probably a bit more in control.
And that's the thing. I think something else that's very dangerous and positive to a certain regard that's happened with social media is what I call the internationalization or globalization of tribe. So back in the day, your tribe were your community, the people that are physically around you that live in your area. Now today, let's take South Africa, for example. Now today, after when Joe Biden was announced as the president-elect, you have South Africans that don't live in the US, but genuinely partying in the streets, gloating, as if this is their president now, and talking about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as if these are their leaders. They don't. And I mean, you can have an opinion on US politics. I have an opinion. You have an opinion. That's perfectly natural because what happens in the US will affect you. But I'm talking about something a bit more perverse, something where you take that interest in US politics and it becomes tribal. I mean, the best example would be South Africans vehemently debating about gun control in the US. It's interesting, but something, for example, like gun control in the US, that legislation, in my opinion, is not going to affect you, but you can have an opinion on it.
Sure.
But I see people, and I'm just using it as an example, I've seen people debate, for example, that type of legislation, and not getting into what side. I mean, that's a whole different discussion. But I've seen people debate things like that, like, for example, gun control in the US, South Africans, as if that will be tomorrow that's going to affect them. Very emotional, very passionate. And that's that internationalization of tribe, where social media has created this very strange environment where people are seeing their ideology or their beliefs mirrored in other countries, whereas you would usually have been, as a tribe or as a community, you would have been united by your values and your worldview. That would have kind of kept you together. And it makes sense. It's kind of the nucleus around which everything revolves. But I think our brains are being tricked in a way when you see other people in other countries that also share your values to a large degree, or that share your ideology, or that share your worldview, and your brain immediately makes the connection that, oh, but that's my people then. Because my tribe thinks in that way, my tribe sees the world in that way, my community has those values, these must be my people as well, and therefore I am invested in their battles as well. So I think, and I might be wrong, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, I think there's a little, and it's not the whole picture, but it is an element there. I think there's a little bit of a glitch going on there where people are, that thing that used to keep you together as a community in a physical space, sharing values, sharing ideas, and if you meet someone that shakes your hand like someone in your community, or speaks your language, for example, or shares your values, immediately you'd think, this is my people. Of course, they must be my people because they share my worldview. And now social media is kind of messing with that. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually really like that idea, the internationalization of tribe. But I think it's also, just to extend our earlier metaphor of politics being a shitty religion, it's the idea that, oh, some people share my truth about the world, okay? And seeing, like the Joe Biden people feel like their truth is vindicated. Oh, Joe Biden won. It means the US is maybe less racist than I thought it was. Hooray. But one thing that's really frustrated me personally about Donald Trump is not him per se, but it's the way that now Donald Trump is sort of like the collective shadow for everyone else in the world. Like South African journalists and politicians all relate to South African problems as if Donald Trump was a force in South African problems, or people who like
the ANC putting out a statement on George Floyd, for example.
Correct. But even more than that, like people saying, for instance, this latest debate about the DA, the DA are Trumpian now because they're moving towards non-racialism and classical liberalism, and that's somehow inherently racist. And you'll have smart people, I'm talking like intelligent folks like Richard Poplack, for instance. And they're projecting the Trump image onto every one of their political opponents in South Africa, relating to South African problems as if Trump was at the core of many of those things. And it's a totally different experience. And I never thought I'd see anything like that. I've never seen a US president. Like, they didn't do that with Bush. And Bush was a real neocon, They didn't go in South Africa, the Busherization of the DA, It wasn't happening. So I think social media has definitely like tricked our brains somehow, and the tribal aspect is so quick to jump out because of that. But you know what I think is very strange. It's like, because I've spent quite a bit of time on social media, you kind of pick up themes and you pick up patterns. And don't you find it funny when you see someone like with their pronouns in their bio, for instance, and you meet someone in real life that introduces their pronouns to you? Like, I find like I can already tell what they think about everything before we've even had a conversation.
Yeah, because like I said, it's like a signal. It's a tribal signal.
Exactly.
It's kind of saying, don't worry, I'm in on the program. I know what it's about. I know how the world works, and I share your point of view. It's, for example, like secret societies having a secret handshake, or wearing your. I think a better example would be if you support a sports team and wearing your sports jersey. If you walk around in Pretoria with a Blue Bulls shirt on, that's going to be an incredibly different experience than walking in Cape Town with a Blue Bull shirt, or walking in Pretoria with a Western Province shirt. And that's tribal signaling. That's something very old. That's something that comes from day one of humanity.
Yeah.
That's the whole signaling that you send out, because it's practical. It makes sense that if you are able to signal to your people or to your community that I'm part of the community, I'm one of you, then that helps out. It makes communication and enemy-friend identification a lot easier.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what a lot of this theater is that we're seeing. And you're completely right. There are certain types of indications that tell me a lot about what people think. Something a bit more abstract is actually when I ask someone, do they think humans are inherently good or inherently evil? Now, that's a very oversimplification of it, but the core of it remains that the question is surrounding human nature, and that they give me the answer to that's going to tell me a lot about their ideology. So people that say humans are inherently good, they will always strive towards the good, their natural position is towards the good, those people tend to be utopians, whether on the right or the left. They tend to think that you just need to create the right environment, and then people will kind of fill in the rest, and you'll create utopia. People that view humans as inherently flawed, as fallen beings, as people, as sinful beings, and beings that can, that in general, if left alone, will more often than not be selfish and look for ways of enriching themselves or improving their own lives. without a moral framework, or people without that type of being raised the right way, they will tend towards that. The best example is children. You don't teach children how to lie. You don't teach children how to steal. You do exactly the opposite. The natural inclination is towards that type of behavior, but you have to teach them not to do that through whatever moral framework or value system that they gain from their community or from their family. So, and well, I'm going on a long explanation of that very simple point, but that's one of you're absolutely right. There seems to be, and this is connected to the internationalization of tribe. There seems to be international signals that you can send to pretty much guarantee that people know 90% of your views on everything. But I'm talking about these are more the people that are possessed by their ideology, or that view their ideology as their team. I don't think if you look at, for example, some of the intellectuals that we have a lot of respect for, I don't think if you just take one of their views, it'll give you an entire catalog of all the other views. It's more of the people that kind of need that cookie cutter guidance in regards to know what they need to think. So they need their political party to tell them this is what you need to feel about this issue for them to take a stance on that issue. And this is not everyone, but there's an alarming amount of people on both the right and the left that fall victim to this type of thinking.
It's an interesting point, because people say that we are more polarized than ever, and people make the mistake of thinking that polarization means that people are being pulled more towards the extremes. But actually, what's happening is people are just consistently believing what their side is supposed to believe in larger numbers. Not necessarily saying that we have far more commies or far more alt-right fascists than they've ever been. It's not the case. However, people are more consistently believing what the left is supposed to believe in America, let's say, or the right is supposed to believe in America. You're not going to find, let's say, a Republican who's, or you will, but more Republicans now will be, pro-gun, anti-abortion than liberals, nowadays. Whereas at some point, most of the people sort of clustered around the center with maybe, certain important factors that they maybe gave more political weight to, and that determined which party they voted for. But there was generally a consensus about a couple of things. Now it's more like consistent on both sides. And that's sort of what's happening tribally in the world. And I think social media is also exacerbating that and speeding up that process, because you get the likes when you're consistent, man. And I've noticed sometimes I'll put out something, and I think most of the people,
a lot of people within our own circles, with when you don't adhere to the recipe, when you don't adhere to the tick boxes.
Exactly. And I mean, it's hard for people to stay principled when you're getting the feedback from the people that actually mean a lot to you and have been cool with you and supported you, that now you're stepping off the reservation, so to speak. So it's a difficult thing, man.
Yeah, I think the core of what you're saying and what I've also been saying is that you have to make up your own mind. You have to kind of think for yourself, even though that's a bit of a worn-out mantra. But something else that's also interesting that I've seen from especially a lot of our ideological opponents is that they seem very sure about what's going on in our minds. I mean, these oaks seem to be expert mind readers. They're like, no, don't worry, Mr. Ferreira, I've got you figured out. I can read you like a book. And then they make these assertions, and you're just sitting there, and you're like, is this person like living in an alternate universe? Is this person like, nobody can be this certain and so wrong at the same time?
Yeah.
But it's not stupid people. These are smart people. These are people that have, for example, master's degrees in their fields. And I mean, you could get into the argument that they've just been brainwashed by the university. So what does a master's degree really mean? These are oaks that they've got a lot of brain cells. Let's just put it that way. They've got high IQs. But they are just so far off the mark. In regards to, for example, The best example for me is the accusation of, oh, you just want to go back to apartheid, don't you? I know exactly that's what you're talking about. Or when I mean, this is something they throw at us, this is something they throw at AfriForum, this is an accusation that they even throw at the DA party that has no history of supporting apartheid.
Yeah.
But those types of accusations, or when they say, you're probably crying yourself to sleep tonight because Trump's didn't win the election, aren't you? I'm like, you can't be farther from the truth. I'm just sitting here checking, analyzing what's going on and adapting to it. I'm not making a video where I'm crying on screen. And that's what makes it so, it's interesting, but also frustrating at the same time to see people, and as I said earlier, throw their dart at the board, but miss it so badly that it's almost like you feel bad for them. You have secondhand embarrassment for seeing their analysis. And I think this is the point that, or the core of the point that I'm making is, and I'm, like I said, these are smart people, but seeing them miss the mark so much and being so sure about it is definitely this ideological possession that we've been talking about. It's where they know the dichotomy. The world is only black and white. There's us and them. We approach politics in one way. That means they think just like us in regards to they are just as devoted as us to their cause. And if you look, for example, at the example of people freaking out because Donald Trump won, that means these people that are ideological opponents will also freak out when he loses in exactly the same manner. Or when Donald Trump wins and you have riots in cities, people breaking windows, setting things on fire, their view is the logical opposite would be that when Trump loses, there's going to be right-wing militia everywhere. They're going to go after people of color. They're going to be dragging gay people down the street and killing them. And this is not far-fetched. I saw these predictions by blue check marks with hundreds of thousands of followers, and people believe them.
Well, I mean, there was Jussie Smollett who faked a hate crime about, like being accosted by a Trump supporter, because that ideological shadow projection is there, man. So you're not just part of your tribe because you think the same way. You're part of your tribe because you're not part of that tribe. And I think that's also something that people need to kind of take a step back.
Right.
A lot of people's analysis, they're applying it on the very first level of analysis. But there's cybernetics, and then there's cybernetics of cybernetics. And then there's even another level on top of that. So when you analyze the analysis, which is basically, like how we became friends, that very first article that I wrote about this woman's analysis of AfriForum, I was like, but hang on, take another step back and analyze her analysis and then see what the problem is. Critique the critique, and people don't really want to do that anymore because everybody thinks they've got the fucking answers. It's like this. Because ideologically, the tribe decrees it so. And it's not a good way of thinking. I also just want to say a couple of things about the culture war. Because I was, of course, disappointed that Donald Trump lost the elections, because I thought Donald Trump opened up an interesting space in the culture war, in that I think Donald Trump, as uncouth as his own speech could be, he opened up more room for us to speak, because he went against all the holy cows of the politically correct establishment, and he broke them all down, and they kind of had no answer to any of that, and he steamrolled that. And for me, I still think that space is now open, and there's a little bit more room for discourse than there was before. And that's where I think the battle is to be won. The battle is to be won by broadening the scope of the discourse. And that battle is not over no matter if Joe Biden is in, no matter if Donald Trump is in. That war of culture and discourse will continue as long as we continue it. And that's the thing about culture people mustn't forget. Culture is spread through repetitive recourse to those behaviors. So if we stop behaving as we have been behaving, the culture will die. But if we can continue with the culture of free speech, really trying to interrogate ideas, standing firm despite accusations that they might throw at us. I think that's something that we can learn from the Donald Trump presidency is that, you know, I've been called a racist so many times, and it's the furthest thing from the truth. But a younger me might have backed down just out of fear of being perceived that way by someone who didn't um, know me. Now I'm like, well, I know that that's a shorthand for you, for someone who disagrees with you. I know who I am. I know what I've done in my life. There's no way you can accuse me of that and actually, understand who I am.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
and
that's a. Oh, finish your thought first.
sorry, no. I just was going to say that license for us to be 10% braver is what I take from those 4 years of Donald Trump being in power, because all the tech censorship, all the media censorship, all the academics were saying everybody think this way. And one person said, fuck all that. I'm saying this and this and this. And I don't always agree with what he said, how he said it, but it gave me a pause to think, shit, you know what? When I disagree with something and I feel that immense pressure, I can actually come out better by speaking the truth than by shutting up and hoping that the mob leaves me alone because I have a Joe Biden sign in front of my house.
Absolutely. And I think, and this is tying back to a previous question or a previous topic that I think we still have some exploration to do, and that's what motivates you and what drives you, and something I've said for a long while now, especially on Twitter, when I encounter people that say absolutely horrendous stuff about whether it be AfriForum or Afrikaners or anyone really. Is that as long as you are motivated by resentment, and resentment is your driver and the demon inside of you, and your ideology is one based on resentment and revenge, you're going to remain miserable. Your existence is going to be an absolute fucking shit show. And here's the cherry on top. You're going to be confused as to why. You're not going to know why. You're just going to wake up and you see all these people, man, like they make these tweets of, oh man, politics didn't go my way. Now I'm feeling suicidal today, or oh, my life is so terrible and I'm so depressed. But the next moment you're like, oh, eat shit, Trump supporter. You can go burn in hell and die. Look at yourself in the mirror. Do some introspection. If you are miserable, that is probably, and not always, but a lot of the times, that's coming from inside. That's coming from self-sabotage. That's not coming from some boogeyman out there plotting to make your life miserable. It's because you're not living correctly. You're not viewing the world in a way that is healthy or positive, or not positive, but that is constructive or introspective. Don't be motivated by resentment, and especially don't be motivated by revenge. It's not going to end pretty for you. It's like that. It's like that Bible verse of what does it gain a man if he gains? What does it benefit a man if he gains the world but forfeits his soul? So I don't believe in winning at any cost, because if you give up your soul in the process of winning it at all costs, you're going to win, but you're going to come out the other side just a shell. And what does it then really mean to win? So yeah, my big advice to anyone listening in regards to this question of what drives you is don't let resentment drive you. Don't let what was it that Nietzsche said? Be very suspicious of people with a very strong urge to punish. I think that's a paraphrasing of the quote. Don't let your main driver be resentment or revenge, because then you're going to tarnish your soul. Rather, look towards, for example, some of the values in the Bible that will give you a lot more of a wholesome way of finding what drives you. Maybe a thought from your side in regards to that phenomenon of people being driven by resentment and it affecting their mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just actually Googling it to get the right first part of the quote. But Jung said that every unconscious conflict that is not understood is played out in the world as fate. And that's exactly to your point of, people that approach situations from the point of view of revenge, they inherently make it worse. It's like that saying, when you set out on a journey of revenge, remember to dig 2 graves. You will make that worse, because the world you create through unleashing that feeling of resentment and that ideology of resentment will be a hideous world. That unconscious conflict is going to play out as fate. So, I would say you need to self-reflect. It's not easy. It's extremely very difficult, and it's very painful, because what keeps me honest is looking at my shadow side. Like, when I get really pissed off about something or someone, yeah, I can get pissed off. Sometimes I even do lash out, sure. But like, when I'm sitting in my own quiet moments, I look up into my own unconscious and I go, like, what was it about that person or that situation that pissed me off so much? And this is another Jungian thing. He said everything that irritates you about someone else can teach you something about yourself. Okay, so you could start from there, because that tells you about your shadow. And when you confront your own shadow, I think you're a little bit more circumspect in your dealing with other people. Like, you give a little bit of license for someone else to not be their best version of themselves, but also keeps you honest to say, hang on, man, you're not all the bee's knees yourself, because you also have this darker side to your personality. So keep yourself honest by reflecting on that. Be mindful, learn to train your mind and focus your attention, focus it inwards from time to time as well. And yeah, don't project, like, learn when you're projecting shit onto other people and lashing it out, because they're probably reminding you of a failure in your own unconscious, let's say.
Yeah. I think my final thought on this would be, when people look at, for example, riots where people set businesses alight and destroy property and assault people, and they look at that with disgust and they say, well, that's not the way to do it. That's not how you do it. That is resentment manifest, what you're seeing there, that destruction that you're seeing there. That is pretty much what's happening when you let resentment drive you. So when your ideology is based on resentment, then you make statements like the world would be a better place without Afrikaans. Afrikaans as a language needs to be destroyed. Those type of statements is what you get when you are driven by resentment. Or, for example, you get the ideological equivalent of burning down businesses and destroying property, but on an ideological level. You get that type of destructive behavior that's not going to get you anywhere. And it's the same with when, and I mean, someone here said it actually in the chat. They don't have a name, but they said, I myself have resented the way the world is this year. Yes, absolutely. You can have resentment for example, lockdowns or the injustices that happened during lockdowns, or absolutely irrational policies that you see around you. I mean, it's absolutely 100% justified to have righteous indignation towards some of these types of policies. But don't let that define you. Don't let your entire drive be that resentment. I think the best, and this is how I'm going to end off this topic, there's that old saying about the soldier. The soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him. I mean, that's what you saw in Japan, for example, during the Second World War. The Americans had to throw 2 atomic bombs on Japan because they knew that they're not going to be able to take that country with a land invasion without losing thousands of their troops, because those people have nothing to lose because they're fighting for. And the same with the Boer War. The Boers didn't fight because they hated the British. The Boers fought because they loved their families and their community and their children and their freedom, the things behind them. They didn't fight it just because they wanted some British scalps. That wasn't what was motivating them. And that's how you approach. That's how you approach injustice. That's how you approach a threat. You don't approach it just because you want to destroy it. You approach it because you want to preserve what's behind you. You want to conserve that which is precious and valuable to you. That should be your focus, not about destroying the enemy in front of you. but rather making sure what's behind you survives into the future. That's pretty much the gist of it. Quentin seems to have paused there again, so I'll keep on that topic while we wait.
No, I'm with you. I could hear you. It's super weird.
All right, excellent. Well, you seem to have paused again, my man. So while we wait for you to reconnect, I'll just add a little bit to that thought. So in regards to, and I think that's the way in which, there you're back. So I'll just finish this thought. That's how you have a sustainable victory, is by having the right thing driving you. That's why I'm hammering on this point so very so heavily, is the fact that because it's about how you win. It's not about just winning. For example, let's say in South Africa, a good example would be an opposition party that goes against the ANC. If that party does not have values that are incredibly opposed to the ANC's corrupt values, if they were to win by just adopting the ANC's ideology, you just end up with another ANC, and you're not going to have any. But their focus was solely on winning. We just need to win. Doesn't care who it is. You just need to replace the ANC. That's very short-term thinking. You need to be thinking about what you replace that with and what is driving you when you're fighting. Because if you are willing to give up your principles to win, and you're driven by your values and you are fighting the culture war because you think your values are worth preserving and not being taken for granted and destroyed. What does that say about the integrity of your values, or the value of your values, to put it that way, if you're willing to give them up to win? Then your values aren't worth a lot, man. Then your values are just there as a little window dressing that you can use to kind of mock your opponent with and saying, I've got the moral high ground, but you're willing to throw all those values away just to win. Then your values aren't worth a lot, man. And then there's not really anything in your cause.
No, absolutely. And this goes back to, wise Roykart once told me that the ends can never justify the means, because the means will influence the nature of the ends produced. And I think that's true on the most fundamental level. The way you fight is more important. And I would rather participate in the culture war and fight by, sticking to my values. Like, I'm never going to give up the value of non-racialism, as unpopular as it has become for reasons which I can conceive of and I think are sinister. But that's a value that I will stick with. And every time the pressure comes from either side, from the right to not be a traitor to the white people, I'll say fuck you. From the left to not be a privileged straight white man, I'll say fuck you. Because my value is just judge that person on their character as an individual. Okay? And I'm going to play the game like that. And I might lose, because it seems more and more difficult to be like that. However, if I win, the nature of the world will be a lot better. And if I stick to that kind of value, that's a hill I'm willing to die on. And man, as much as we've talked about politics, I also think we've talked about, politics, like, you want to see aspects of yourself reflected in the world. But just be cautious about those aspects, because you have good sides to yourself, or you have a good side and a bad side to yourself. Okay? So be honest about your resentment that you might have. And then when you see yourself embodying that, take a step back, because it's not a good look. And it pushes people away from you. It alienates you from others. Rather, instead, try to embody the positive aspects of yourself. And winning at all costs, it doesn't create a better world for anyone. It's not a zero-sum game. That's the thing.
Here's a good point in the chat. Blank name says, violence provokes its like. Does road rage ever work? No, it doesn't. You just end up creating a very unsavory and bad situation. Yeah, well, for me, the big thing is it matters how you win, because when you reach the mountaintop, you're going to want to plant a flag in terms of how I got here. And if your mantra is, well, I got here by just crushing every skull that came, that stood in my way, and I double-crossed innocent people, and I ruined thousands of lives, but at least I won. You're going to be standing on that mountaintop, a hollow shell without a soul. And what type of existence is that? And as someone in the chat also alluded to or implied, it's not about being popular, it's about being right. It's not about having the agreeing with the general consensus. If you know within your heart that you are right on something, but 90% of society doesn't agree with you, you need to stick to that principle. It's not a popularity contest. It's not a democracy in that regard. If you genuinely believe, for example, let's take an example of a value. Let's say your value is that I will never betray a friend of mine. That's one of your integral principles. You will never stab a friend in the back. But you are presented with the opportunity to stab a friend in the back to get a lot of personal gain. Do you really think that selling out that principle and giving it up is going to make that victory not just absolutely bitter? And when you get that gold, it's just not. It's just going to turn into dirt in your hands. That's how life works, man. It's almost in a biblical sense, or in a karma sense, or in a blinde sambok sense. Bad things happen to those people that sell their souls. They win in the earthly sense, but they don't win in the more metaphysical, bigger than ourselves sense. It's not all about earthly things. It's about bigger things. It's about matters of the soul. It's about matters of keeping your soul pure. And not selling out your principles. That's the thing. That's how you. And I mean, this is one of the things in the title of Politics, Psychology, and Happiness. According to me, that's how you achieve happiness. Is by sticking to your principles and sticking up for what is right, even when it's unpopular. There's that excellent poem by C.A. Langenhoff, and it's in Afrikaans, but I'll do a little bit of a paraphrasing. So in the poem, he says, give me a man that does what is right even when the judge is absent. Give me a man that let me just get it here. There it is. So in Afrikaans it goes, gee my 'n man wat sê wat waar is as die duiwel daar is, wat doen wat reg is as die regter weg is, en wat trou by sy gewete bly, al kry hy straf in plaas van beloning. Al sou hy straf in plaas van beloning kry. So just a quick translation there. So he says, give me a man that says what is true even when the devil is present. A man that does what is right even when the judge is absent. And a man that stays true to his conscience even if he receives punishment instead of reward. And I think that's the principles that we all need to live by, because that type of life preserves not only your soul, but also I think is a life where you would have a damn good chance of having a good, fulfilling life, even if you don't have all the possessions in the world.
Absolutely. And one of the things I actually really liked about that poem was he recognizes the duality. And the duality of, the truth and the devil and the lie. Like we'll always be confronted with those things in our life. And it's the same as happiness. You shouldn't strive for a life without suffering. Because you need to understand suffering to understand happiness. And you can only really know one of those things in contrast to the other. So that's why I say look at yourself first. Look at your shadow first. Understand why you're getting pissed off about politics, why you're getting pissed off about the world. Work there and embody what you want to see. And that will be the way to win the culture war.
Exactly. And here's an excellent comment by Sideline Opinions who says, there's nothing as sweet as hitting the pillow with a clear conscience. And I think Quentin, we've already gone way over time, so I think we're going to wrap it up. I wanted to get to the cure for nihilism as well, but I think we'll do a second.
Go 3 hours, bro. I can do it.
I think we'll do a separate episode on that. I think it's worthy, actually, of a separate episode. So my final thought there in regards to that topic would be another quote, and that's of Jan Rabie, who's also an Afrikaans writer, who said, dis beter om teen die hele wêreld te stry as teen jou eie gewete. So what he said there is better to fight against the entire world than to fight against your own conscience. And I think that sums up my point earlier, where I said, if you know you are right, you know you are on the right side of, not of history, but on the right side of a matter or of an issue. Don't look at whether you are in the minority or the majority. All that matters is that you can justify why you are taking that position, and you've put in enough thought as to why you take that position. If you have that and you know what you are, and you know not only what you stand for, but why you stand for it, I think you're going to be a force to reckon with. Then you're never going to be blackballed, and you're never going to be a victim of nihilism, as I said earlier. So I think a commitment to a principle a day keeps the nihilism away. But I think we'll get to that in the next episode. So, Quentin, do you have any final thoughts in regards to all the topics, or like the general direction that this conversation has gone in regards to what we've covered?
Well, you know what? I'm just going to say that I found this very life-affirming, getting into these topics and discussing them with you. So thank you so much, Adams, for creating the platform for that. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And yeah, the antidote to nihilism in brief is meaning. Like, that's it. If you have something that means more to you than nothing, then that's the antidote to nihilism. And it really can be whatever. That's the thing. Like, you are the one who creates the meaning in your own life. And that's, I think, one of the profound religious ideas that I've taken from Eastern philosophy. So go and create that meaning. It's not just out there for you to find. You actively have to create it and participate in it. And that's what gives life, it's what makes life worth living.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. I think, to sum it up, if you were to give it numerical value, if nihilism was 0, the antidote is +1.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, Quentin. Thank you for your time. Thank you for another excellent conversation. And thank you, everyone that tuned in. If you like Quentin's thoughts and you don't know who he is, but you'd like to follow him, go check out. There's a link to his Twitter in my description. He's currently has his tweets on protected, but not for sinister reasons, for just a small little personal reason.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you very much for tuning in. If you are new to this channel, leave a like, subscribe. It helps out a lot. And I will be having a lot more conversations like this in the future as well. And yeah, I'm just going to get to some of the final messages here before we say goodnight. So I see here 00 says, funny name, Quarantino. So his real name is Quentin Ferreira, but he is also known within our circles as Quentin Quarantino. Cornelius says, thank you to everyone for the great conversation. Really enjoyed it. Thank you for tuning in. Mark says, Adams and Quentin, two wise young men. Great show, guys. Good night, all. Or good night, Mark. I hope you have a blessed evening. Debbie says, thank you, guys. Well, thank you, Debbie, for tuning in. And the last message that I'll be reading is from Ice, who says, thank you to have some coffee on my behalf, Quentin.
You know it. Thanks, Ice.
All right. Cheers, guys. Have a good one. I will be doing another episode of Stream of Consciousness tomorrow evening at 9. And I will be talking to Don the Pleb, an American, who's going to be talking to us about what to expect from the next 2 months in American politics. It should be very interesting. So cheers, guys. Have a good one. And God bless. And remember, sticking to your principles every day keeps the nihilism away. Good night.